Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce myself. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Damian Cardona from the Department of Public Information, and you will be seeing me a lot if you're going to be following the Oceans Conference, because I will be the spokesperson for the conference starting today. That is our first press conference all the way until next Friday, June the 9th. As you know, and it was announced, there will be a daily briefing at 12:30, just after the regular noon briefing. Today, as a preparation in the route to the conference starting next Monday, we have a focused press conference with a representative from small island states. That it's not a secret for anybody that those are, the world as a whole is very much interested in the ocean's problems, but small islands in particular find it as a threat and as a challenge. And we are very honored and grateful to have this afternoon Ambassador Ahmed Sareer, Permanent Representative to the United Nations for Maldives, and also Chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. To his left, we have Ambassador Marlene Moses, Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Sorry, that was changed. We have to his right, we have Ambassador Jane Chigial, Permanent Representative for the Federal States of Micronesia. And to the left of Ambassador Sareer, we have Ambassador Ronnie Jumeau, Permanent Representative to the United Nations for the Seychelles. So with those three, I would say, key representatives of the small island states, I'm just going to give the floor to them for some introductory remarks and to hear about the expectations about the Ocean Conference starting next Monday. And then, of course, we will open the floor for all of you for questions and answer. So please, Ambassador Sareer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Department of Public Information for organizing this event. And it's a very timely event just before the UN Ocean Conference. As you all know, the Ocean Conference is such an important one for small island developing states like us who are represented here, because for us, oceans is our livelihood. Oceans surrounds all our islands. Although we are known as small island developing states, very often it's referred to as large ocean states because of the how much livelihood dependent on the oceans. Even if you look at the Maldives itself, Maldives is just 1% land and 99% ocean. Therefore, we rely so much on the ocean system and the ecosystem that is surrounding us, and how important we like to see that there is a global action on the oceans. Well, very few people are more aware of the challenges that the ocean face than small island states like us. We see it in the plastics that wash up on our shores, in coral reefs that turning ghost white year after year, and smaller fish harvests. We know that the large-scale challenges that the ocean faces from climate change, for example, ultimately requires international concerted action to address. But I want to focus very briefly on what action we are taking in our own backyard to do our part. After tourism, tuna fishing is our most important industry in the Maldives. 1 in 5 of our citizens are tuna fishermen. We eat tuna for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. And to protect this precious resource, we implemented very strict harvest rules. Our fishery is entirely pole and line. the same kind of low-impact gear used in our waters for many, many centuries. This highly selective nature of the manual gear nearly eliminates bycatch of dolphins, sharks, turtles, and whales. Additionally, our waters are close to foreign fishing operations, which allow us to keep better tabs on the fishery and ensure its economic benefits remain in our country. It is one of the cleanest and greenest fisheries in the world. That is what we are doing in our own backyard, but the Ocean Conference is an event that we can all look forward for help. One message I want to convey is to let the world buy sustainable tuna and ask questions about how and where your fish was caught when you order at a restaurant or at the market, and explore ways to take better care of your local ecosystem and demand the same of your politicians. Together, we can save our ocean. That would be my message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Together we will save our oceans. We keep this sentence. Ambassador Jumeau from the Seychelles.
Thank you very much. As has been pointed out by Ambassador Sareer, small island developing states are the ultimate ocean states in that we are surrounded by the oceans and the seas, and we depend very, very heavily on them for our economies. Without healthy oceans, we would not have viable economies in most cases. So for me and for Seychelles, the Ocean Conference is about leadership. It's about leadership in solving and tackling the issues and challenges the oceans face and ocean communities in island and littoral states face. It's not about the state of the oceans. I think we all know about the state of the oceans. We all know what's happening to the oceans. It's about what are we doing individually, nationally, domestically, regionally, internationally to address the issues, to address the challenges that the oceans face. And as I said, as the ultimate ocean states, what you will hear during this conference is a vast amount of work, that amount of leadership that islands are providing when it comes to ocean issues. Whether it's oceans as part of our sustainable development, whether it's oceans as part of conservation, whether it's oceans in tackling climate change, you're going to hear a lot of innovative things coming from the islands, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people. Already, for example, in our case, amongst the voluntary commitments we're going to make, include innovative solutions, innovative financing for helping us fund the implementation of SDG 14 and other SDGs, because as you know, all the SDGs have to be looked at holistically as a group. But in Seychelles, you're going to hear things like about the debt for adaptation swap to turn 30% of our EEZ into marine protected areas. You're going to hear about us preparing with the World Bank and Jeff blue bonds, some $10 to $20 million in blue bonds to fund sustainable fisheries. So we're looking outside the normal channels of funding and financing. And keeping of the spirit of the Samoa Conference and the Samoa Pathway, which talked about partnerships, you're going to hear a lot from islands about the various partners they have, not just the normal bilateral donors that they have, but also teaming up with civil society, with the private sector, PPPs or 3Ps, public-private partnerships. In our case, philanthropic bodies are helping us fund. You're going to see we are reaching out to all the friends of the oceans that you can think of for us to meet the challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now we give the floor to Ambassador Jane Chigial, the permanent representative of the federal states of Micronesia.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for coming and for your interest in this important subject. The UN Oceans Conference is naturally about the oceans and everything in it. Pacific Islanders often refer to ourselves as ocean people. We arrived in the region after sailing in wooden canoes, using nothing but the stars to guide us. This traditional skill and knowledge of our surroundings continues to this day. Like other island communities, including my colleagues from the Indian Ocean, tuna is an essential part of our diets, livelihoods, and economies. It has been said that tuna is to the Pacific what oil is to the Middle East. Over 2/3 of the global tuna catch comes from the Pacific Ocean, with 2/3 of that taken from the EEZs of the Pacific Island states. Like so many other natural resources, our tuna is being impacted by climate change. Last year, a strong El Nino event saw tuna following warmer currents moving eastward. As weather patterns such as El Nino become more frequent and more intense with climate change, tuna may move away from traditional fishing grounds near Palau and Papua New Guinea to the east. While this could be beneficial to some countries in our region, it is short-term, it may not last, and the long-term trends could end up hurting us. Additionally, the more tuna that end up on the high seas, the more they are subject to illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, a major threat to the sustainability of tuna fisheries and our economies. A recent study showed that the Pacific Islands lose at least $616 million a year in lost revenue due to illegal fishing. In response to this challenge, and like my colleagues from the Indian Ocean, we are promoting strict conservation that saves the fish stock. But we should not do this alone and can't do it alone. We need partners. We need your support. The international community has a responsibility to come together to improve monitoring and penalties for IUU fishing. We need to improve science so we know the health of the tuna stock. And we need your partnership to also help us improve local institutions needed to be even better stewards of our own resources. The Ocean Conference is a key opportunity to deliver on SDG 14. It is the beginning of the much needed work ahead of us to ensure that our ocean is healthy and sustainable, and to also highlight what is needed for all of us to do to improve the livelihoods of small island states and the people around the world, and also to leave this valuable resource for the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and thank you also to the two other permanent representatives. As you can see, fishing is a big topic, and there will be a thematic dialogue and several moments during the conference that this will be a big issue next week. So please, questions.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Waldo from Prensa Latina. Two questions. According to many reports, it's expected that US President Mr. Trump will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. What is your reaction on that? And my second question is, what kind of outcome do you expect from this conference in terms of specific action? Thank you very much.
Whoever wants to answer.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very, very pertinent question because for us, we were working very much closely together with all the outcomes that for the last couple of years we have been working on: the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and now coming to the Oceans Conference. At the same time, for the small island developing states, we also have a Samoa pathway that was adopted in 2014 in Samoa, the third international conference on small island developing states. So all these are all intertwined, and we need there is better implementation of that. And Paris Agreement, of course, is a very, very important part of it. And we would very much like to see that the early implementation of the Paris Agreement. As you know, the small island developing states has been very much at the forefront of calling for have their asks into the agreement. We had done a lot of work in getting our concerns reflected in the Paris Agreement, negotiating with all the big powers, and we were very happy that it has come out in a strong language. Well, not the same as we would have wanted, but then it came out a good document. But then at the same time, now it is time for its implementation. But the question about any country, withdrawing from it is going to be a weakness, which we would be very concerned about it. But we are still working on it, and hopefully we will be able to get the implementation done as quickly as possible. Well, it is a time where there's a lot of concerns raised about this issue. But small island states, we believe that we should be working together with the willing partners, and that's exactly the partnership that we are going ahead. It doesn't have to be one particular country that has to be, dependent upon on the Paris Agreement. On the specific actions, there are very clear specific actions on the Oceans Conference. There are three particular, outcome documents that is coming out. One is a call for action, which has a strong language that has been, negotiated, and I'm glad that the document was just finalized, in a way negotiated just last week, and we are hoping that it to be adopted by the ministers when it comes to the conference. The second is the voluntary commitments that the countries have pledged, and many countries have submitted. And again, from the small island states, you would see there's quite a number of commitments that has been already filed, already submitted to the UN conference, and those are the ones. So ultimately, it all depends on how many voluntary commitments then come about. And at this moment, we are glad that quite a number has been submitted. These are the specific actions that will be coming out. Of course, we would very much like to see that the outcome is strong, because there needs to be a lot of work relating to all aspects, whether it is the ocean acidification aspects, whether it is on the conservation side, on the fish stocks, on the climate change aspects that reflects on the oceans. All this has to be very clearly an outcome has to be decided, so that we are hoping that it will be a good document. Other colleagues may supplement some of that.
Well, thank you for that question. I will just try to answer or add to Ambassador's response on your question about the U.S. withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. I like the statement that the former Secretary General like to use, that there is no Plan B when it comes to climate change. And I say this because for Pacific Island countries, climate change is an existential issue. So we will continue to do what we have been doing. As you know, our contributions to this problem, this challenge, is very small, and yet we have done everything that we need to do to do our part. And so we will continue to do that, and we hope that other parties to the Paris Agreement will maintain and hold their commitments and obligations. Thank you.
If I may, on the issue of the U.S., my worry is that the international media is going to concentrate on who's leaving the room and not on who's staying. For me, as alluded to by Ambassador Sareer as chair of AOSIS, the the emphasis of the SIDS will be on a sort of a coalition of the willing. Who is in the room? You cannot work with someone who's not there, right? And no amount of words is going to make that person come in. But when we were in Bonn for the Intersessional, the latest climate science that came out was that now that it looks like China and India are looking to meet their pledges and even perform even better, the effect of the US not being in the room will not be as bad as it was made out to be from a scientific point of view. Yes, you need them because of their emissions, but the action that is being made by other emitters, the largest and the third largest, will sort of counterbalance in that sense. So we have a window of opportunity to try and convince them. And we can only convince them by actions, by those of us who are in the room talking and responding to that and saying, this is what needs to be done. And coincidentally, this week, Chancellor Merkel is meeting, or has already met the Prime Minister of India, and she's due to meet the Prime Minister of China. What that means for the future, I don't know. She hasn't declared. We've heard talk of a sort of alliance, a climate leadership between what remains of the European Union with China and India and maybe Canada. And this is, for me, that's the positive news. I was just saying to someone, this is a case of glass half empty or half full. That's not true. The absence of USA does not make the glass half empty or half full. It's still more full than empty. So I think it's the attitude people use. And one thing you can look out for in the Oceans Conference, I'll segue into this now, is you're going to see an increasing movement worldwide by countries trying to find out how best they can use the oceans to tackle climate change, especially through ecosystem-based adaptation, EBA. And more of them, Seychelles is included, more and more of us are also looking at ways so as to increase our ambition. There's only so much ambition we can have in the small island developing states as emitters. But one of the ways we're looking at increasing our ambition to shame others into action is to see how can we factor oceans, for example, into our NDCs. People complain that oceans are not mentioned enough in the Paris Agreement. There's nothing you can do about it. The Paris Agreement has been written, it's been agreed, that's what it is. What is not defined is what you can put in your NDC to implement the Paris Agreement. And we are free to bring in the oceans as much as we want. Seychelles, for example, is looking to do a blue carbon assessment of its ocean territory. The debt swap will protect 30% of our EEZ, which is 1.4 million square kilometers, 3,000 times bigger than all our land territory put together. So you can see that there's innovative thinking. We're not looking, how can you worry about someone who's not in the room? What you have to worry about is look at who's here, who's sitting in the front row, and say, now what are we going to do about this? How are we going to step up so that it brings benefits to it all, especially through business, through jobs, through healthier lifestyles, and so that people who are not in the room can hear what's happening and say, I think I should be in the room rather than out. You're not going to hear any of us necessarily condemning it's their right. He's a president who's been elected democratically. It's his right to do that, whatever he wants to do. We are staying in the room. We are getting, and the fact that you're seeing like Chancellor Merkel now meeting with Prime Minister Modi and the Prime Minister of China shows that we are already responding by saying and maybe one of the good effects of it is that it's forcing us to strengthen our ambition in a way that we know there is a gap here that needs to be filled. Who is going to step forward to fill this? How are we going to fill this? What needs to be done? Same thing as the outcome of the Ocean Conference. What Seychelles is expecting is, first of all, a better understanding of the challenges, what is being done, already being done. And I said island states, as ocean states, are already providing a lot of leadership. And what are the gaps? And how are we going to fill these gaps? What needs to be done? And if in the Oceans Conference also we see deficiencies of leadership, it's a conference about leadership, not the lack of it. It's where is the leadership, How can this leadership speak together in a global way, in a way that we've never done before for oceans and that we've done in other areas? So for me, I still have an upbeat look. Small island states cannot afford to be dismayed or to feel down or to feel depressed about any of this. We cannot afford. We have to move on for the sake of our countries, and when we do it for the sake of the SIDS, we do it for humanity in general for all countries.
Thank you very much, Ambassadors. I think there was a question here. No? No? So here, please.
Thank you. To follow up on what you said, the ambassador from Seychelles, if the United States...
Can you please introduce yourself, please?
I'm Somini Sengupta from the New York Times. If the United States pulls out of the Paris Agreement, what are you asking the European Union, China, and India to do to step up, as you said? And to all three of you, if the United States pulls out, what will be the impact on your countries?
To respond to the question to me, if the United States goes ahead and pulls out, it's not a problem just for the United States. It's a problem for all of us. It's a question of the emissions that they're putting out. So it has an impact on whether it's China, India, EU, Canada, or emerging economies which are increasing, which have been increasing emissions until recently. It's a problem for all of us. So we can't say, oh, this is a US problem, and they're going to lose out on the jobs, let's say, on the sale of technology for energy, renewable energy. It's more than that. So that means that all of us who are left in the Paris Agreement have to review. We already knew that there's going to be review. We already know that the review was going to show that the pledges on the table are not enough. So what is going to happen now is that we're going to have to say, now, without such and such a contribution, what more do we have to do to step up what needs to be done? And I think one of the encouragements for the major emitters who are still around the table, who are still in the Paris Agreement, is that I think there's a general, the spirit of the Paris Agreement lives on. When Prime Minister Modi was in Spain, I think Spain also just reiterated. We've heard President Macron as a new president saying, no, there's no going back. We've heard the UN Secretary General recently saying there is no going back. So I think the spirit, the willingness, the determination, the commitment to the Paris Agreement is strong enough for us for there not to be a backsliding by other countries saying if they're not in the room. I think there was a time with the Kyoto Protocol we saw that happen. I think after Paris we've seen a change in the global attitude towards, because climate change is getting so bad, it's so in your face, they cannot ignore it. They cannot ignore that there's someone, if someone stumbles, you try and give them a helping hand, but you move on, you cannot go back. And I think there are already signs that is happening, especially from the main emitters. And we in the SIDS, not speaking for Ambassador Sareer here as chair of AOSIS, are determined to encourage them. We're not going to denigrate anybody for that. You do what you have to do, but it's through your actions as a group. For example, we will push China and India and the other major emitters saying, well done on what you're doing so far. Climate leadership, if it has to shift from one region to another, it's not as to who's leading, is that leadership continues and leadership grows in strength and in commitment.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add something?
Thank you. Well, let me say I fully concur with my colleagues' response to that, because actually, when you really look at the way that the SIDS have come this far from the beginning, you know how much skepticism was on the whole issue. We have come a long way from the time when AOSIS was formed in 1990. A time when climate change was not even, up in the air, in the negotiation table. It was not in the UN jargons at that time. But we were a group of island countries that were faced with our, same similarities and the threats of, sea level rise and global warming, that we were keeping our drumbeat all across the world. Eventually, it took up to the UN main chambers, and it was such a uphill task, the way that we have come up. You have seen how we were coming up with this, raising our voice of the fate that we are in, to be highlighted by the international community, and we were raising that voice. But it was not always the case that we have been heard. We should have been heard much more earlier, and the world would have been in a better shape if it did. But it took such a long time for us to even arrive at this point also. Even when you look at the case of Copenhagen failure, I mean, still the Seeds were continuing. Still, the Seeds did not give up. So that spirit is what we keep us going, because for us it is a day-to-day, life-threatening that we face. Our people are facing it every day. We are seeing how the rising seas are washing over their beaches, their houses, the people, their livelihood. So we have been raising these concerns over and over and again. Of course, the United States came much later. I mean, they were one of the the biggest skeptics even then. Eventually, we were able to bring them on board for the Paris Agreement. It took a lot of work. So obviously, we would even now, we would like to see US still on board. But as my colleague has said, we cannot really have any control over, because it is their prerogative. The US is their prerogative. But still, the Seeds will not give up. We will continue with our work. We will raise this, our voices as much as we can, because our island countries, the seas are rising, and the more and more IPCC, documents that are coming up, research is coming up. It is becoming much more clear of what we have been talking about earlier. Of course, there were in the 2-3 decades ago, people were just saying these were just not true, what the islanders were saying. But now it has been much more, with evidence. It's established, and more countries are, believing in, and more scientists community has believed in this, that what we are facing is real. So that is the spirit that the islanders would do. We would continue with our work, with whoever who is willing to partner with us, and that's exactly what the last SIDS conference in 2014 was all about. Genuine and durable partnerships. I think that is what has really looked upon for the SIDS countries, because we will be looking at who are the genuine and durable partners in this world, that who would work with us. And that's the dictum upon which we are working. Whoever who is holding our hands, we'll go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. We are seeing the adverse impacts of climate change even here in the U.S. It's going to affect all of us. But for the Pacific region, we are the front line. It's already affecting us. It's an existential issue. The support that goes to the science-based communities, if that is affected, it will also impact the evidence that one has to provide to show the adverse impacts of climate change. So in order to build resilience, you also need that kind of information. But as I mentioned earlier, we will continue to do what we need to do and how we can contribute to this, to finding ways of mitigating this issue and adapting to the challenges, because we have to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. I think you wanted to pose a question.
Matthew Lee, Intercity Press. Thanks a lot for doing the briefing. I wanted to ask about a different issue, which was fishing subsidies. And I see that the conference will address it. They estimate like $35 billion in subsidies. If you can say, like, what are the countries that are doing these subsidies? Do you think this conference how will it interact with the World Trade Organization has been trying to deal with this issue for some time as well, just as a matter of sort of trade? And what are the negative impacts, can you say, of these subsidies to fisheries in terms of expanding their ability to plumb the depths of the sea and overfish? Thanks.
The issue of subsidies obviously is a key issue. One thing about subsidies that is not talked about very much is that it has been a barrier to small island states building up fishing fleets of their own. Especially when it comes to industrial and semi-industrial fishing, it's very expensive to run these ships. And without subsidies, especially for the big industrial fishing nations, actually the size of their fleets would reduce because they would find that it's not that profitable to do what they're doing. But one issue about the conference is, I think for the first time, the general public will get a better view of what the issue is about. It's been in the WTO, obviously. It's an issue in the fisheries sector. But the Oceans Conference is bringing a much wider audience into the room, and more people will understand what the issue is about subsidies. In the meantime, for example, the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, which is headquartered in Seychelles, just met in Indonesia. And one of the measures they're taking is to cut the exploitation, I think, of yellowfin tuna by about 15%, something like that. Cut the use of fish aggregating devices, FADs, by 50% or 20%, or something like that. So we are doing whatever actions we can take. But it's always been an issue where we've said, as we cut the fishing effort in the different oceans, in that we reduce the amount of fishing on certain species, which means certain countries, especially the distant water and fishing nations, which tend to be the very big ones, will have to cut the size of their fleets, the number of boats that we give licenses to. The issue of subsidies rears its head because we cannot expand our own fleets. We cannot build our own fleets to make up, to get the best out of the fishing agreements we have, if we're going to compete against subsidies. And when you're talking of subsidies, you're also talking about cutting subsidies, preventing us from offering subsidies. So I think maybe the Oceans Conference it brings it to a wider audience for people to understand it's more complex. We've been asked that when I was Minister of Fisheries, we were asked in Seychelles, why do we have all these EU fishing purse seiners, and why don't we build our own? And we said, when you look at the cost of building a purse seiner, competing against countries that are using fishing subsidies to actually build the seiners and operate them. But at that time, it was a very, closeted conversation. So I think one of the things that's going to come out about oceans for the general public is that things are much more complicated than people think. There are many more challenges in the oceans than people realize. There are some people, they talk about fishing stocks. We know we're overfishing. But it brings into a much bigger fora, and hopefully, people like us who are fishing nations, where ocean states, we're fishing nations, will gather more allies who will understand better and come forward with more information and that sort of thing in a much larger arena, which puts the fishing community under a much larger microscope. That's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We can just take a quick question because we are running out of time.
Well, about overfishing, specifically with regards to tuna.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Ariana King with Nikkei Asian Review. So specifically about tuna, I'm sure you are aware that Japan, for example, exceeded its quota for Pacific bluefin, and being SIDS with such an important, tuna being such an important part of your economies, I'm wondering what kind of engagement you want to see in this conference from countries like Japan or China, who can still survive with other industries, but do consume quite a bit of the tuna and catch even overfishing in some cases. Just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Thank you for that question. I hope that the format of the conference would allow that honest discussion. Ambassador Sareer shared earlier about the outcomes expected out of the conference. And I'm trying to see where that kind of discussion would happen. Because it's not in the format that we have before us. But of course, on a bilateral level, that discussion is always happening when the fishing agreements are negotiated or discussed. So that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just mention that I think one of the best things about the Oceans Conference is about everyone coming on board, talking about all these aspects: overfishing, the acidification, the plastics, whatever you name it about the oceans. This is the first time in a long, long time that we are having the UN at a very highest level coming to a conference and talking about all this. Of course, these issues are being discussed at a various agency level in the past, but not in such a big, gathering in a big scale as this. So this is for the first time we are coming up to hold those discussions. And you are very right, those overfishing issues are something that is very, very important for us, for small island developing states. And we have our own different policies with respect to that. For example, Maldives does not allow foreign fleets in the waters. And we do catch on our own, and we export to the larger fishing community. So there are, but then at the same time, it does affect us. Although we do have restrictions, but it does affect because we are seeing already in the when we look at a continuum of time of how our fishermen had been able to go out fish in the open waters, the amounts that they catch and the ones that they are catching now are very much minimal. So that is very clear. So these are issues that we need to be discussed within the conference at the same time, as my colleague has said, at the bilateral level as well. Because when you have the leaders gather in a conference like this, it also opens a lot of opportunities for bilateral discussions, trilateral discussions on those matters. But many of those concerns are at the moment reflected in the call for action as well as in the voluntary commitments. Thank you. Jima.
I'd like to answer that from another angle. The issue of what for us are the distant water fishing nations, which tend to be the big countries. There's the EU has in Seychelles, the largest EU tuna fishing fleet outside of the EU is actually based in Seychelles, and you have countries like China and Taiwan and Japan traditionally have been big fishing nations, and these talks have gone on. But when I was answering him, it's been in a very specialized setting. Either it's at a WTO or it's at the FAO or that sort of thing. One of the opportunities that's provided by the Ocean Conference is to get the consumers and the retailers on board. We've been talking, for example, to the World Economic Forum, which is interested in taking that action, where the people eating the fish, especially in restaurants or eating it at home, put pressure on the retailers who buy the fish from those fishing nations. And in some countries, it'll work better than others. But we've seen that work in the past. I remember at a time when there was a movement in Europe and America, for example, against tuna that is caught at the expense of dolphins, where the nets were catching dolphins. And there was a backlash from the consumers on the ground. And I think maybe something like the Ocean Conference, which appeals to a wider audience, will open up such issues to other countries, to other friends of the ocean, other people who have other interests in the oceans, for them to know, once more, as I said, the complexities of this, that maybe if there's the consumers come back and say, look, have these fish, have these marine products that we're consuming been ethically sourced, for example? At what expense to the stock? And they put it on the retailers, and the retailers have huge influence on the fleets in that they are the ones who buy it. And they only buy from the fleet according to what people are eating, obviously. So if the questions don't come from the consumers, from the public, to say, am I sure what I'm eating? You're saying that in the climate change discussion now, the issue of beef and vegetables, you had even President Obama has been raising it. It's something that's coming from the ground up, this one. And where that is going to go, I am not sure. But you can see the influence of public reaction to what they are consuming, whether it is being done in an ethical way, who is suffering, are the countries which have the resources. We are the ones which have the resources. But unfortunately, these are straddling resources. These are migratory resources. So when they go into for example, the whole issue of BBNJ, high seas, when they go in the high seas, we have no control. So even if, like Maldives says to foreign fishing boats, you can't come into my EEZ, once the tuna moves out, they have no control over it. It's the same, for example, we're part of the Indian Ocean. Once it's outside our EEZ, we have no control. So I think we need a groundswell of reaction from the audience, from the consumers on the ground. And I think the Ocean Conference is better placed to provide an opportunity, a vehicle for that, than the specialized agencies like Food and Agriculture Organization or WTO when it comes to trade. I think this is one of the niche areas that the Ocean Conference, I hope there are more in future, can target, saying the others don't target that, so that when the fishing nations come to a conference like this, they know they will be targeted in a way that probably they haven't been, because when you're in some of these fisheries, it's all business people. It's the owners of the fleets, it's their governments, and you know, so taking it to a wider audience, I think, will maybe help address these issues, because sometimes discussing this face-to-face, country-to-country is not an easy negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Tomorrow at 12:30, we will have kind of the introductory press briefing for the conference with USG of DESA, Mr. Wu, and also the President of the General Assembly. That will be at 12:30. We might also have a briefing on Friday, but it's not yet confirmed. We will announce. And again, I remind you that all next week, every day at 12:30, we will have a briefing on the Oceans Conference. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Sareer. Thank you, Ambassador Jumeau and Ambassador Shigyal, for being here this afternoon. Good luck. There's a lot of work, I think, in the week ahead of all of you. So for the benefit of all of us, we really wish you a wonderful, successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.